You're listening to the Be Better Off Show by Kelly+Partners.
Good morning to all of our listeners on the Be Better Off Show. It's a beautiful Friday morning in Sydney, blue skies, and I'm very excited. Each episode, we try to bring you a guest who can help you be better off, which we define as being healthier, wealthier, and wiser. Now, in this COVID environment where work is changing, everything's gone a bit odd. Our next guest, Andy Hurt, who's the MD of Poly in Australia and New Zealand, I thought could add some really interesting insights. So welcome, Andy.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. Great to be here, even though it's virtual. And I must admit, I'm used to shaking hands and being a bit more tactile than we are in this two-dimensional world we live in at the moment.
Yeah, it's a very interesting one. I had a meeting this morning, socially distanced, bumping elbows, kicking feet, and nobody knows whether they should be shaking hands or fist pumping or what they should be doing. And I think that's quite a good analogy as to where we've come to. But before, for our listeners, I get there, I was just saying to Andy before we got on air, I played a bit of cricket with Andy. Last time I saw him, he was steaming in right arm over the wicket for the cricket followers from the Windsor Castle end with the Queen driving by in her green Jaguar station wagon giving us the wave.
Going down for afternoon tea.
Going down for afternoon tea, exactly. So Andy, tell us a little bit about yourself. Did you grow up in Sydney? You played a lot of cricket. What led you to where you are today?
So Brett, yeah, I did. I'm a Sydney born and bred boy, educated in Sydney, but my career has always been focused in the IT sector, in the IT industry, and working for primarily international organisations, helping them and serve their customers better in either very large installations of IT, but in the last 20 years, I've been focused very much on the collaboration and unified communication side of things. So a lot about helping organizations work better, collaborating better internally in their organizations, but also helping them communicate with their customers as well. But I've been based in Asia Pacific. I lived in China for a while, but I haven't got an illustrious cricket career to tell everybody about, but it's certainly something. It's a bit of a passion of mine. Unfortunately, my boys who are 13 and 14 haven't followed in my footsteps. They've gone off in different directions. They're playing things like basketball and water polo and taekwondo, a lot more things that weren't available when I was growing up. But look, they're happy and enjoying life at the moment as well. So we've been living life in a very different way for the last 6 months. Poly is an organisation that has actually been of interest of mine for some time. In that we manufacture and distribute headsets, video conferencing equipment. So this is obviously a very sweet spot for us right now. Our biggest challenge, if anything, Brett, right now is keeping up with the demand. Getting supply around the world, manufacturing and getting things around the world.
So where are you manufacturing the headphones or the headsets?
Yeah, look, we have a bit of a distributed manufacturing methodology. We primarily manufacture in Mexico. Tijuana is a very large manufacturing plant which we own. We good
excuse to go to Tijuana.
Yeah, I think so. But Tijuana's been in full steam ahead for the last 6 months, 8 months. Trying to produce and meet the market demand of a supply that's been pushing us to 300% productivity. But in this time, as we all know, the hard thing is to meet that demand because in a labour-intensive environment, everything is being pushed out, and we're asked to actually have less labour on the floor at any one time. So we're being pushed in two directions. One is less physical labour, but increase the demand by 200%. Bit of a hard economics if you look at it that way. So we've actually done one thing. We've opened up a separate plant in China now just to keep up with the demand. So we're opening up new factories to meet that in the headset world, but also in the video side of things, because this type of communication, Brett, has become the new way of of people collaborating and feeling more comfortable being in front of a camera.
Yeah, it makes a huge amount of sense, which is interesting. So for our listeners, Andy's been good enough to provide a really nice PowerPoint deck that's called Hybrid Working, Creating the Next Normal in Work Practices, Spaces and Culture. And we're going to provide that as a downloadable document, which I think people will find really, really interesting. The authors are an applied futurist, an architect and best-selling author of the Not So Big series of books, and a professor of leadership and dialogue at the Holt Ashridge Business School. I guess as you look through that document and generally to have I guess a framework around redesigning, reinventing, responding, as Polly have described, the journey to the next normal. How would you advise, like we have, Andy, very small businesses, very, very large businesses as clients, but I'm seeing, I can share with you what I'm seeing, but I'd be really interested in your thoughts about, what should the leadership of these businesses be thinking right now, where we're in this kind of odd, it almost feels like a lull between two worlds.
Yeah, look, Brett, it's a really good question, because obviously every day we're talking to businesses about the challenges that they're facing. We're running sessions weekly with C-level managers in organisations, as you say, very small to very large, in different sectors. You've got the education sector and the health sector. You've got government, and they're all dealing with it slightly different. But interestingly, they're coming back down to some very basic similarities. And you touched on those three phases that we're seeing a lot of our customers dealing with right now. The first one being everybody's just responded to what they had to do, really to keep business continuity going. So they've responded and done the best they could with what they could. And so they were grabbing technology, they were grabbing new work practices, they were holding together the culture of organizations the best they could, because it is, they couldn't go to page 13 of any manual that said, well, this is how you deal with a worldwide pandemic. It's sort of one of those, we are all in this together in a new way, and no one can really tell you exactly, what page 13 says. But so that first phase of responding, everybody's just done the best they could with what they could. They grabbed technology with, as I mentioned, the hardest thing for us is keeping up with the demand. But at the same time, people are just grabbing and doing what they could. The second phase, which different people are in, I feel a lot of companies are in now because they've had some time to think, and people from Victoria, for example, have gone through that first phase and gone back into another phase of restriction of work practices and physical movement. But they're in this redesign phase. They're going, okay, we've had to have some time to think. We've got some ideas of what we need to do. And some of the work practices that they're seeing, they're adopting as this is going to be forever. This is not going to be just the clouds part and now we can go back to work the way it was. I don't think anything is ever going to be the way it was, which is, in some ways, and we'll talk about it in a minute, but some of the really good things that are happening that we can really embrace. And
it is an opportunity, isn't it?
It is a real opportunity. And I think...
Just on that, Andy, just because I think not all workplaces were ever designed consciously. Most workplaces, in my experience, are a function of what happened yesterday being repeated rather than a conscious decision around how should this workplace work to best serve its customers and its people.
And that's sort of an organic thing over time. And it just evolved, and sometimes quite often without a plan. And so it was just, they evolved that way. People were following trends. If you go back last year, Brett, this whole trend of open workspace, activity-based working, people were coming into the office without a desk that was theirs. They were sharing things, and it was sort of moving in that direction. And people were going, okay, well, this sort of can work. And now you look at that now. That's not going to work. You're not going to come in and use a shared desk. You're not going to come in the same way. I was being
very recalcitrant, Andy, for many years, saying that
holding onto your office.
Well, I was just basically saying that if you came to work at Kelly+Partners, we would give you a desk and a chair and a place that you could make your own. Because
you were very forward thinking, Brett. That was what it was.
Well, I was regarded as backward thinking, but I thought, with our Aboriginal ancestors here talk a lot about the importance of place. and how dispossessed or disoriented people
Yeah.
feel when they don't have a place. And I think, I'd said, well, if you come to our place, we'll give you a place that is yours and ours, where you feel, at home, and you can make
Your own.
your own and make a place. And it's funny, I've always been a germ freak, so I really didn't like the idea of living with the filth of someone else or someone else's scenario.
Yeah.
But it's, yeah, look, in that respect, I believe we were very conscious about design, but I saw a lot of people being caught up in, I guess, fads. What's everyone else doing? Well, everyone else is. I would have every design group come into me and say, Brett, you need to be activity based. And I said, I want to be person based. And that really messed with their heads. So, to your point, this sort of to redesign in a conscious way,
Yeah.
and then this sort of next step of sort of reinventing,
Yeah.
I think is really empowering for an organization, if the leadership are prepared to listen around, hey guys and girls, if you were to redesign, reinvent the place today, how would you do that?
And I think you've hit on a really good point, where leaders and organizations need to think about it as part of their business. What are they going to do in their business, but what are they going to do with their people? Because from a cultural perspective and an individual perspective, you've got to think of it that everybody's going through change. We need to think about how do we really help the individual cope with this, but the organization cope with this. It's not just a disaster recovery or a business continuity plan for the business. It's a business continuity plan for the individual as well. And I think you need to really think hard about how do we, as managers of people, manage differently, manage output rather than just input. From your scenario of having the people come back into the office and see them out there, the old way of thinking. And I think the recalcitrant mindset of having someone out there is the only time I think they're going to be productive, other than actually giving them a little bit of space, giving them the ability to be able to work more flexibly, this hybrid work model, and then measuring output. I mean, a great saying about all of this, you'll see in the report, is that work isn't a place you go, it's actually what you do. And so it's the work itself. And I'm actually instituting this in our business here in Australia and New Zealand, is that I want you to work at home but meet in the office. And so just have a different mindset to it. So they're actually thinking that, because you've still got to have the interaction with people in the real world rather than just the virtual world. You've got to have that. You've got to have the balance.
Yeah, I think it's interesting.
It's not all or nothing. And getting to that reinventing piece, I think people need to take a step back and really think, what have we seen that we can actually really embrace as productivity gains? I think we're seeing some really good productivity gains in certain sectors. But don't be complacent to think that, oh, well, just because I'm getting an OPEX reduction in potentially doing one thing, I'm actually getting yes, I'm seeing a bottom line increase, but are we seeing individual productivity that we could really double down on and get a huge increase? So
it's an interesting one, because just to pick up on those comments, Andy, rather than work as a place to go, a focus on what you do, I think one of the sort of I think the deepest philosophical challenge that people face is whether they are their work or the work is something they do.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I believe a lot of people today have this false separation between who they are and the work they do. Now, as you get a more explicit values-based culture, hopefully in most organizations, people need to align their values more clearly with the organizations that they work in and how they behave within those work organizations and with their clients and people. But if it's what you do versus where you go, I think people miss the who you are. And the most effective people, in my experience, it really doesn't matter where they are.
Yep.
They are trying to make their colleagues, the business they work in, and their clients better off. And so, with those people, we've had no drama ever where they are. Because we know they see, they're so focused on making other people better off in terms of their colleagues and their clients. And, I think, using a sporting analogy, most of the really great work happens off the field. You know, by the time you're on the field, you can either bowl that ball or catch that ball because you've done the practice or you haven't.
Yeah.
And you don't want to end up on the field with somebody who's having a bad day or has got an injury that they haven't told you about or can't really perform. And so those informal conversations, observations of people, you know, even on videos, I can look at our team and sort of say, mate, that guy doesn't look right. Why don't we give him a call and see if he's okay? I think that's underrated, you know, that people piece.
And I think that on that cultural piece, and I put that into that cultural bucket because the bit that I've instituted in Poly, meeting fatigue of that, you know, you come up to 9 o'clock and you go into a meeting and you're straight into the agenda, and at 10 o'clock you're out of that one and straight into the next. You don't have that if you are in the office. You have that at least you're walking between meetings, or you're actually interacting with people, and you've got decompressed time, but also that physical, you can look across the room and see someone. So what I've done at Poly is the first 5 minutes of a meeting, it is for general conversation. It isn't for business conversation. It is something which you leave at the beginning of the meeting, time to, how are you going, Brett? How was your day? How was the weekend? And it's okay to do that, because sometimes it feels very awkward to do that in a meeting. And especially
in a video format.
Yes. I agree. Yeah.
I feel like in a meeting, you know, if I'm with one of the team and we're walking to a meeting, often, even the act, I had a meeting here in North Sydney this morning, and we met the two people we were meeting with downstairs in the coffee shop, grabbed a coffee, sat down for a second, had a bit of a chat, came up, walked from the lift to the meeting rooms.
Yeah.
And you've had a 15-minute, you know, how are you doing? It did mean that by the time we sat down to do the business part of the meeting, firstly, there's a bit of rapport build. You can see how somebody feels that day. It was a negotiation. So there was a hard edge to the conversation about what we were trying to achieve together, but it was able to be done in a much more connected capacity than I felt it would have been done on Zoom. Now, they'd suggested, hey, why don't we do a Zoom meeting and try and sort this out? And I said, well, you know, I've got a big enough boardroom we can distance. Why don't we just get ourselves in here and see if we can sort this out? And it took, you know, at the end of the day, it took an hour. But to your point, 15 minutes of that sort of first part of that was really moving around, walking from here to there.
We're human beings. So it is a case that we get, you know, I think there's some great research in being able to understand that, you know, 85% of the communication is nonverbal, and it's one of those ones where, you know, you can really get a feeling of how someone is, how they're feeling, where they're looking, what they're doing, you know, and you get to know someone. So they're the kind of things that we've been trying to work with our own organisation, but obviously with helping other people. I mean, our industry is how do we maximise, you know, communication over the phone or over video, and the technology built into certain things, into our products, help to a certain degree, help a long way to get it right. And I'll give you an example. I mean, the headsets that we've got block out noise, right? They block out noise in the microphone, is built-in technology, so the person on the other end doesn't hear the different conversations going on, let alone the lawnmower in the background or the blender in the kitchen or the vacuum cleaner. You don't hear that. You only hear the conversation. The other part is noise cancelling. So I only hear what you're saying. I don't hear that either. So, you know, that kind of technology in the headset
creates connection.
It creates that connection. It creates that we're here for a specific purpose. And similar with video, where the video is clear, it'll track me as I walk around the room. It'll make sure that you're seeing what I want you to see. You know, or for that matter, what you need to see. You need to better have that conversation. So,
and you know, if you've been in enough of these meetings now, and I think this reinvention point so important, because if you've been in enough of these meetings now where somebody's video doesn't work properly, their headset doesn't work properly, the noise cancelling, there isn't any, they can't really hear you, you can't really hear them, it's extremely frustrating, really not productive. So that's an example of where, you know, this technology that you guys are rolling out can really add value. Can your little cameras go on, you know, I'm using my Microsoft Surface Pro, this big thing that's got a great camera in it. But do you guys do little cameras that we can put on any computer?
I've got a Surface tablet as well, and that's what I use. But I then use a camera which I put on top of my screen, because you don't want to be looking up my nose. It's a case.
So I've got the studio, the big screen, so it kind of works pretty well. But most of our guys have the surfaces to move around.
Yep, and look, that brings onto a really good point, where a lot of the technology is built for more meeting rooms and larger spaces and so on. And I think when people in March, when everyone said, right, go home, you're not allowed to be in the office, a lot of people grabbed what they could. Some technologies that were in the office, they've tried to adapt into a home office, for example. And then, you can start to see that the good technology, or the technology, is being adapted to work in different environments. Now, it is actually purpose-built. We've got cameras that do sit on top of screens. If you've got a large monitor, or you've got two monitors, and you want to have a screen that's sitting at eye level, which is what we're doing
much
today.
Better.
And then the audio, and the other thing, Brett, is lighting. Having the right lighting. There's nothing worse than having too much backlight and you can't see me, or for that matter, I mean, you've got a terrific view in the background and your lighting's great there, but you can't. That's it. You can't.
I believe that how you present yourself to people says something about the respect that you have for people. And so, if they can't hear you and you haven't bothered to make your computer video camera work, your lighting work, then it's not particularly respectful of
the other practices
person
that we're putting into play to that exact point. If it's a video call, turn your video on. So many people mute their video because they just don't want to be seen, or they're doing something else, or because when you're sitting in a meeting room and you can't go off and do something else if you're doing your.
So we've got that rule, Andy. So one of our and so on that reinvent. So for our listeners, the journey to the next normal. Step 1, redesign. I think consciously. Step 2, reinvent. So one of the things we've said, Andy, is that we do video meetings. You have your camera on. You're not on your phone, and it's important to be present. If you can't be present or don't want to be present, sure, turn your video off, put your hand up and say, look, can you excuse me? We've all been in meetings where people need to go to the bathroom. That's not new, or they need to take a call or whatever. But I think, being conscious about respectful interactions and effective interactions makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And look, I think when we get into that redesign phase in our cycle, and I think when people are consciously in that redesign phase, not necessarily the reinventing, but the redesign phase, people are starting to then, organizations are starting to realize that they've got to add into their expense line some productivity tools, or some even furniture, or things that they probably didn't expect that they would need to, if they're going to give and expect people to work as well at home as they would be, work wherever, as you put it, instead of in the office. They're going to need to build that into their budget to ensure that they've got that comfort level, that productivity level from employees.
So it's a good one, Andy. So I'm saying to our guys, well, hang on. I've never known a builder who doesn't have a work shed on his property, at his home. And that's because he's a builder. It's not because it's his job. It's because he's a builder. Now, you'd know many men, as I do, who are professional white-collar workers who have these amazing man sheds because who they are when they're not being a lawyer is, in fact, they're a frustrated part-time woodworker, right? But you go to their house and you can see who they are because they either have a golf stick tuning room, or an extensive collection of surfboards, or a workshop. My grandfather was a fitter and turner. He always had, as a kid, this amazing workshop where he could pull a car down, put it back together, do whatever he did. Now, I'm saying to a lot of our people, hey, whether you work with our organization or another organization, if you're a white-collared knowledge worker, you should have a study. Because, a person who is a wood turner has a workshop. It's not your employer's responsibility to build your workshop.
No.
You are, essentially working in an organization at your own leisure and pleasure on a 4-week notice period. You should have a study. You should have a professional library. You should have a place from which you can work should you wish to work from home. As an organization, we're happy to support you in that.
Yep.
But if we've provided an office and it's a
Yep.
very well provisioned office, and then you've decided that you would like to work from home. Now, at the moment, it's a pandemic, but I think in this reinvention, these are some of, I guess, the ideas we're kicking around and that I'm challenging,
Yep.
our clients
Yep.
and friends on. I'm saying, well, hang on, it's not for somebody to turn up naked and we'll dress them and put their headphones on and etc. It's like, well, hang on, if you're a knowledge worker, you need to make that. And that was my earlier point about work's not a place to go. I accept that. It's not what you do. I argue it needs to be who you are. And that means your home should reflect who you are.
That raises another challenge, and this is the one that I think goes even deeper into the individual's mental
State.
and that is so that you've got to be able to separate yourself sometimes. Where people went 9 to 5 to work, they decompressed on the bus or the car on the
Correct.
way home. They could then separate the two. They get home. They're not in a lot of professions, in a lot of roles, people never had to bring their work home. They could just, and so then they were who they are, as you say. They can be something different. Where that line is blurred, some people are really struggling with that.
So I think this is enormous, Andy. I believe the mental health of our people,
yes,
with our clients and everyone, is enormous. Now, in terms of setting your life up to do your work, if you want to work from home, and this is one of the challenges I'm putting to people at the moment is saying, if you want to work from home, you need a dedicated workspace.
You do.
And Sydney is an extremely expensive place to live, which we're obviously aware of. With people not working from home, you can have a much more distributed workforce, as we do. We've got 15 offices, so we're not all CBD based. But I do really worry about people working at home in a small space on the kitchen table, never being, never having any ability to close their computer, turn off their phone, and be present to something else.
Well, this was amplified. This was amplified on, I can't remember the exact date in March, but when the kids were told to go home, you've got, and the workforce was at home. You may not have even had one dedicated workspace in your home, and now you've got to have 4 or 5 dedicated workspaces at home.
So this is what I think is the most interesting part of culturally where we are. A lot of people have views on what a workspace should be. They hold their employer to a higher standard than they hold themselves. The real question facing, I think, all people in a modern economy like our own is, well, what is a home meant to be? Most homes today are designed to not accommodate elderly parents. They shall be outsourced to an aged care facility. In our culture. In our culture, in modern Western workspaces where most of these conversations are happening. But, we're outsourcing old people to nursing homes. We're outsourcing young people to childcare. Many people don't have a study. But they have a big TV room. So there's more TV watching than studying, which is probably not ideal if that's the type of work you want to do. Now, I would add to your 3 next normals that we need reflection in there, which is,
I think that's the arrows in between those bubbles, Brett. I think that there needs to be real reflection and real thinking. You shouldn't think yourself in, I've passed that response phase. Now I'm in redesign. It's a continual cycle because you're responding to that. Oh, hang on a sec. There's a lot more mental health issues that I've got to deal with here. So I've got to respond to that. I've got to go back to stage 1 on that one. We need to really challenge ourselves on that. And I think have different people challenge that in the organisation and have organisations like yourselves from outside looking back in saying, well, have a bit of a think of it. Use different lenses to challenge your organisations.
Yeah, we've had often, Andy, over the last 15 years, I've had people in extreme grief. They've had somebody die or something really terrible. And often when I've sat down with them, I've said, I want you to come to work. And they were like, well, but I'm really unhappy. I said, well, that's good. Come to work and be unhappy. And what we found was that when they were around their colleagues who were less unhappy, when they had the sort of diversional therapy, if you like, of work to give them something to do to stop them sitting in and wallowing in a place of horror without any particular productivity targets for them, they would come to me later and they said, I'm so glad you asked me just to come back to work because I I was able to keep moving. I had my gym at work or my yoga down the road, or it just kept me moving. And I really had sat at home feeling quite displaced, if you like. So I think you're right. I think this idea of, as we try and find a new normal, committing to, I love this word reinvent. It
Yeah.
gives people permission to turn things upside down,
And look on the positive
really
side.
change.
And
Correct.
look on look on
Absolutely.
what are the opportunities out of this, rather than, oh no, I've got to really just navigate
So that's
the
been our
pitfalls, right?
mindset. We're like, hang
Yeah,
on, we've got
yeah,
permission to have a blank page, which is one of life's beautiful things. As
yeah.
professional advisors, what I've been trying to get our 45 directors to do with our clients is, notwithstanding how terrible their situation is, understand that in crisis there's the opportunity to reframe, refresh, rethink. And many of our clients who had zero revenue when they were closed down, all of a sudden found ways that they discounted before to go online, to provide delivery, to think about how they could otherwise serve their customers. And
Mm,
many of them have built back 40 to 60% of their revenue from
yeah,
zero
yeah,
within a lockdown format,
yeah,
which means that they're actually at 140% or
yeah,
160%.
yeah.
And so I guess what, people in your position, our position, where, people still have to do their tax, I guess, no matter what, but is that if you're in a position where you're not, on the canvas in terms of the changes that the government's forced on you and the pandemic's done to your business, and I think it is our role to be cheerleaders
Yep,
of, and to put an arm around and
yep.
help
Reach out
other
and help
people
people
and
up. Yep.
reach
Mm,
other and say to them, hey, we're trying to direct business, every dollar that we spend as an organization, to our clients, to say,
mm,
hey, if we can spend money. I'm saying to people, if you want that coffee shop in your local area or a local business area to be there, in the future, buy some takeaway. Even if you don't need it, send it to somebody that does.
yep,
Buy some coffee, buy a bottle of
yep.
wine off them. Try and think broader. Happily seeing people really respond to that mindset.
No, look, I totally agree, and I even things like, and we sort of have these 8, and it's in the report where it's sort of what to expect in this in inverted commas next normal, and there are 8 points that they make you sort of think, and some of these points that we've already covered, like the home office spaces, where when you're going, and it's interesting speaking to real estate agents at the moment, a lot of people are really thinking, how
Yeah,
many spaces have I got? Is there a dedicated, and that's a real plus now, where a year ago people would go, oh, that's another bedroom where the kids can go off to do their homework. No, we need dedicated spaces that we can do things. The home is going to be different, as you rightly said. I'm
it's
lucky enough.
good because it's
Yeah,
showing your children. You can tell somebody or show somebody, and showing's much better than telling.
yeah,
I remember, Andy, when my son Tom, who's now 15, was about 4, Beck would say, hey, Brett, you're always working. And other than Sunday, that's true. But, one day he came out, he had my black work shoes on, and he put a tie around his neck. And he said to,
this is
Beck
what I've
said
got to
to
do.
him,
Yeah,
yeah, Beck said to him, what are you doing? He goes, well, I've got my work shoes and my scarf on. And it was a tie, right? And Beck was telling me this story in horror, saying to me, it just shows that that's what he thinks you do. And I said, well, I think that this time is giving
yeah,
families an opportunity to see their mum do
yeah.
what their mum does in a
Look,
different light, to see their dad in a
yeah.
different light. That's a good thing.
Well, 2 weeks out of every 4, I'd be on an aeroplane or going up to Asia or going off to the US or doing around Australia, and the amount of time I've had back to my family has been fantastic. I mean, Trudy and the boys have seen more of me, which at first it was one of those ones of when your family goes, when are you going away again? But but it's got into a great rhythm. So the home is different.
Yeah.
We're lucky enough to have a granny flat out the back, which we converted into a classroom, and we really adapted what that was all about. I mean, and it's been a great thing for the home changing.
I think that's huge.
It
I'm
is.
just looking to these 8 things that you've got, and
Yeah.
for our listeners, when they grab this, it's a really great presentation on page 20. What to expect in the next normal. Home office spaces built into residences, increased flexible work across multiple locations, recruitment over larger demographic areas, work from home, meet in the office, smaller company footprints over more dispersed locations, seamless workflows, technology designed for ease of use with personal devices, only necessary business travel. Absolutely nailed this. So Andy, I'll throw to you. Run us through these, because as you can probably tell, when I read this, I get excited for the possibilities that change has for us.
Well, I just think it's really nice summary for people in their business planning, just to say, have I thought about these as opportunities? What can I do to help my clients, let alone my own organisation, with the home office spaces, or increase flexibility in workspaces.
So this one, recruitment over larger demographic areas. I think this is really interesting.
Because that opens up so many avenues, Brett, where you don't think, okay, well, I've got to employ people in a train line, coming closer to work, and therefore that's the only way that we can recruit. Now, these days at the moment, we're employing people we've never physically met. And we're quite happily doing that, and knowing that the productivity rates can be as high, if not higher, knowing that we can put the work practices we've put into place since we've redesigned what we're doing. And it opens up a huge amount of scope of talent, which we didn't even have in our mindset. Have people living up in New South Wales, in Crescent Head, or people that have made a bit of a change in their life.
Well, because we became very much, I've got this criticism, I guess, Andy, that the more people talk about diversity, the less they actually do it. As this real distinction between what you say and what you do.
Yeah.
So we have a society now that speaks so much of diversity, but when you look at it, they don't employ some random hippie living in Byron because he's a hippie that lives in Byron. They don't, it's very much senior execs from the same postcodes, from the same schools, thinking in the same way. My second favorite businessman is a guy called Bernard Arnault, who founded Louis Vuitton Moët Hennessy, and he says, if there's no one in your business that scares you or makes
challenges
you think,
you,
makes you think, what the is that person doing here? And he's buying these fashion businesses and alcohol businesses and all sorts of things. And he said, he bought one of the businesses, and they run a management school for all these guys. And when this fashion guy came in, hair all over the place and dressed like a maniac, a lot of the accountants were sort of like, and lawyers were like, okay, who's this guy? But it's easy to talk about diversity, but the idea to say, okay, we're going to recruit over larger demographic areas, that would mean that many women in particular who have, who do carry what is often described as the burden of young children, perhaps the opportunity of spending time with the young kids is another way to look at it. But from a career point of view, to feel locked out of what goes on in an office, with the right technology and mindset from senior people, it unlocks a much, much larger pool of talent.
Oh, look, I think that's a huge opportunity. It is in the way that organisations can think differently, demographic, physical geography, but as you said, untapped talent that couldn't necessarily work in those work hours the same way. I think people are becoming a little bit more open-minded to that. So I think that's an expectation which opens up a huge opportunity.
And then smaller company footprints over more dispersed locations. Andy, when I started our firm, all the firms were in the city. They still are. We're the 23rd or 4th largest firm in the country. There's not a firm larger than us that's not CBD based. We have 15 dispersed offices across, Northern Beaches, Central Coast, Norwest, Inner West, Penrith, Bathurst, etc., Wollongong. Give a shout out to the people in Bowral and etc., Campbelltown, and it was regarded as very odd that we had these small offices, but I called them drive-ups. It meant that we were able to give people parking in most instances. We were able to very close to their home, and importantly, there's a global happiness study that had indicated that people, the second thing that makes most people most happy was distance from work. And if people could be within 25 minutes of their workplace, it makes a dramatic impact on their health in particular and well-being. And so I said, well, if you had offices closer to the talent and closer to the growing markets and businesses that you wanted to be a part of, then with technology today, this was 14 years ago, I thought we could run distributed technology. Now, obviously, technology's gone bananas on a curve that's helped us tremendously. But in this situation that we're in now, it has served us because we're close to our customers, close to our clients, and those offices are easier to keep clean, easier to close down, easier to have dispersed workforces. I just think it's something that, the structure in Hong Kong where we have an office, you can take a month by month lease, or 3 months or 6 months or 9 months, whereas here it's typically every landlord wants 5 years. So I can just see things changing for the better.
And look, and I think that point there being that it's not going to be this mindset, the ivory tower, large high rise is the only place to have an office. And I think people are going through that mindset. And yes, that might be in certain sectors are a bit more gravitated towards that. I think some that are a bit more focused in being able to have that dispersed workforce. But I think going back to that recruitment side, the more that disperses out, the satellite offices and the smaller ones will actually show that is going to be, as you said, a very strong point for company health, for people in the organisation wanting to work there. The happiness of how that the managers manage people as well. It's that kind of thing that is going to really attract the right talent too. I think that'll actually have a really strong push.
Yeah, it's really, we found it. If you can reduce somebody's travel time to work, it does make a big impact. Now, technology designed for ease of use with personal devices. I guess, I want to give you the chance to give us a pitch on Poly, but in particular, as an organization, what I like the idea of is to be able to give somebody, a personalized technology pack to say, if you're a Kelly+Partners person, we'll provide you with a camera that works and is attachable, a headset. What would you guys provide for an organization like ours, which is not dissimilar to many of our clients and people listening to this program?
Being specific to Poly, when I joined Poly 2 years ago, I came from many different organisations that had very large portfolios of products and technology. When I came to Poly, we had 3 main lines of product, but we had lots of different products in those lines. And those lines of products were headsets, audio equipment such as desk phones, speaker phones, and those kind of things. And then we had video technology. But what I realized is that people have their own preference. We class it as personas. So as an individual, you have your likes and dislikes. You have your preferences around how you like to work, what you do, whether you want a physical phone, whether you use a headset, whether you use audio, whether your environment allows that to happen. So what this point here being that it's all about the person's flexibility, but also comfort level, because you get a little bit of a fatigue after a while wearing a headset. You might want to complement that with a good audio device that you can be on a speakerphone instead of having the headphone, or just traditional complement well with your mobile phone, for example. So it doesn't matter if you're talking on this type of situation with Zoom on a computer, then you walk away and you still want to better use the same headset on your mobile phone, for example. So the technology allows you to be flexible in that. The second point is when I mentioned personas, people like, and with headsets, you can either have in-ear technology, which in other words, you're just little buds or those kind of things, or you can have on-ear technology, which you and I are using, or over-ear, where you're totally blocking out everybody. Then you can have one ear or over the head, or it can be over the ear. There's so many different alternatives, but it's certain people that, and for me, I don't really, and I'm losing my hair, so therefore I don't really care too much whether it's.
Yeah, but no, it's true. Like you're right. You're totally right, Andy. Like some of the girls don't want something that messes up their hair.
Well, and if you've got extremely curly hair, it's a case that you physically can't fit something over the top of
your hair. Yeah. So you'd provide a catalog and say
absolute catalog.
Like an online catalog, and say, hey, you've got a budget. How long do you expect a headset to last?
Well, look, the good thing is that there are certain replaceable items on a headset. but also some of the things that that it is a 2-year type thinking in my mind.
Yeah.
But you can actually replace certain things, depends on how often you use them. But I've got for example, I'm lucky enough to be able to have multiple different types of headsets, where I've got one where I use this little one here,
Yep.
where I use that when I go outside. And the reason I use that is it's purpose built for being outside. So it really knocks
the
out
noise.
all of the noise.
Yeah, I
any
like that
winds and
too,
all
so
that
I
kind of
can
thing.
walk around.
And you can, look, you can have the roof off on your car if you're lucky enough
Yep.
to, and you're not, it's and being able to do that and have that as your audio device, and people on the other end really don't know where you are and what you're doing. So that's the important part. I think that's a big part of it, and that persona base allows people to realize, actually, I can do all of that and get the enterprise grade level of audio and video, and it's actually built for me, and they feel more personal about it. You mentioned a welcome kit to Kelly+Partners. You'd have a catalog and say which persona fits you best, and then you go that one. Therefore, might have one or two headsets depending, and a camera if that's the type of computer you've got. So the technology can be built to the way you work, and it makes a massive difference. And the thing that you and I are
that goes
doing
to
differently,
place again. Andy, I see it's like the shared desk. Are we going to have shared headsets?
No,
at
never,
some point,
in my opinion.
you have to be a people-based organization that tries to start with the people and build up the organization, rather than shove the people into a co-working scenario or something you read in a book.
The different type of headsets that require just a little bit of thinking before people supply.
Before jumping in. Sorts of headset prices?
Oh, look, it varies from $100 to up to $1,000. It depends on what you're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve, and the different types of things. When you start looking at contact centers and call centers, you've got very specific and very high tech,
heavy
types of
heavy use.
duty. But also, heavy use as well. But then you've got ones that are a bit more flexible in the way that they do work. But obviously, headsets are one thing we do, but the video bars are the other. The video cameras, but also full bars that have the audio built into them, and room-based systems, and the other part that makes a big difference is the same interface or same way of communicating into the system. Doesn't matter where you are, is an incredibly important deal for us, because we want to make sure that if you go into a meeting room in one place or one of your 15 offices, you're not going to have a different experience if you go to another. So
that's absolutely, Andy, that's our mindset, is that the more consistent your technology and integrated, it's easier to train your people.
Yes.
They are more likely to use it if they're familiar with it and it's easy to use. And interestingly, there's a lot of emphasis on ease of use, but our experience is the easiest thing for people to use is something that they've been trained in and that they've used before. So once they've used a system, even if it's harder to use than some other system, they just know subconsciously, how to use it. So they prefer that. And so consistency, I think, across your work and home environments to use technology that you've been trained in makes a huge amount of sense. Now, I want to thank Andy for jumping on today. He's a really wonderful gentleman, and I'm privileged to know him well, and his beautiful wife Trudy, who's a fantastic photographer. So if you ever need a photographer, there's a plug for Trudy. She's a great person as well. This is really, I think, an area that all business leaders need to be thinking about. They need to be reading on it, reflecting on it, seeking out people like Andy that are working in it day to day. You can learn the most by asking people who have real experience for the benefit of their experience. And as I think all our listeners can hear today, people that really know what they're talking about, like Andy, are very generous in sharing their knowledge. So I really want to thank Andy for spending the time with us today. We're going to post this deck so that people can access it. And I'd really recommend to all of our listeners to take this opportunity while the world's being turned upside down, to really challenge yourself to think through, if your organization could be the best organization for your people and clients, what would have to change?
It's been great talking to you today, Brett. Good.
Excellent, Andy. Thank you so much.
Good on you.
Have a great day.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Be Better Off Show. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to rate and review on Apple Podcasts.
Have a great day.